Back to Mr. Jenness.
Thank you, Chair. Mckinsey is an ethical dumpster fire.
This guy's garage. Like and subscribe.
Thank you, Mr. Poulter. Respectfully, I think the company you work for is disgusting, and I think your efforts to whitewash its conduct around the world aren't going to fool anybody who's familiar with McKinsey's track record. And these are issues that we take very seriously as a committee. You say McKinsey refuses work sometimes, presumably on the basis of some ethical criteria. You are a company that literally held a corporate retreat down the road from a concentration camp in Kashgar, and then claimed unfamiliarity with the Uyghur genocide, even though reports about it had been all over UN reports and all over the news prior to that. Specifically, I want to ask you, you claim that your work is guided by the Economist's Democracy Index. I'm skeptical about that claim. Can you tell us specifically which Russian state-owned companies McKinsey has worked for since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014? Go ahead, please.
So let me start by restating. McKinsey is an ethical company.
Yeah. Could you actually just answer the question, though? Which Russian state-owned companies has McKinsey worked for since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014?
So McKinsey is an ethical company. I wake up every day knowing it's an ethical company. I know the 1,100 people who work in Canada know it's an ethical company.
And I wake up every day knowing it's not. But can you answer the question that I just asked? Which Russian state-owned companies has McKinsey worked for since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014?
So I'm the managing partner of McKinsey Canada. I've spent 28 years of my life in Canada. The bulk of my work and bulk of my time is leading our operations in Canada.
Mr. Chair, can you bring the witness to order and inform him of his obligations to answer questions from committee members?
Member has a point. If he could get back to the question at hand, Mr. Poulter. I'm
trying to answer the question. I don't know the specifics of what we have done. As I said,
So you don't know which Russian state-owned companies McKinsey has worked for since 2014?
Correct.
Okay. Are you aware that of McKinsey's work for the China Communications Construction Company?
Again, Mr. Chair, I lead the Canadian practice. The bulk of my time is in Canada.
So you're unaware. Is that what you're telling us?
What I am saying is I know we have operations in China, and I know the vast majority of our work in China is for multinational corporations.
You work extensively for Chinese state-owned and state-affiliated companies. That's already a matter of public record. You just haven't been willing to release the names of the companies. Are you familiar with China Communications Construction Company?
I am not familiar with China. Sorry, I'm not familiar.
Okay. It's striking that this is a similar sort of communications tactic that we saw from Mr. Barton, which is to say he wasn't aware of a lot of things. It's striking to me that I seem to know more about McKinsey's clients, or at least the names of the clients from media reports, than some of the McKinsey executives or former executives that we've had before the committee. Let me ask you a question that I'm fairly sure you can answer, though. Have you personally worked on Government of Canada contracts?
Yes, I have.
Okay. What's your hourly rate when working on those contracts?
McKinsey doesn't have an hourly rate. We're actually only allowed to charge on firm fixed price contracts.
Okay, so approximately, given the amount of time you spent working on Government of Canada projects, what does that equal on a sort of per week equivalent?
Again, we price on the basis of deliverables, and every engagement is different.
All right. I think there's a lot of questions about what the deliverables are, but do you have a fee schedule for your analysts?
Again, our pricing, according to the procurement rules of the federal government, is firm fixed price contracts. We are paid on the basis of delivering the deliverables stipulated in the contract at a price agreed to by a competitive process.
Okay. Sir, you said that in your opening statement that McKinsey followed all the rules, that these were competitive contracts assessed by public servants, that all the rules were followed. That's a similar line we received from ministers. The problem is that your talking points aren't up to date, because the government released a press release on Friday that said there are indications that certain administrative requirements and procedures were not consistently followed. I don't think the government would issue a press release admitting that they didn't follow follow all of the rules in their procurement with McKinsey if they weren't sure they hadn't followed the rules. The government wouldn't release a press release like that saying that they had failed to follow the rules if they had been following all the rules. So do you want to acknowledge that that certain administrative requirements and procedures weren't consistently followed, and do you want to share with us why that happened?
I'm afraid you're not going to get an opportunity this round, but perhaps the next round, or perhaps you can address it with someone else's round. Mr. Kuzma.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And of course, we know you work with governments around the world. You work with the government of Russia. You work with the government of Saudi Arabia. You work with the government of China, entities that are affiliated with them. You told your employees not to attend a pro-democracy protest in support of Mr. Navalny in Russia. And again, you may not be aware of those things, sir, but those things are, of course, matters of public record. And I wanted to follow up just at the end of the last round of questions. I was asking, you say all the rules were followed. The government admitted in a press release on Friday that all the rules were not followed. Were all the rules followed or not, sir?
Well, as I stated previously, McKinsey takes its obligation to adhere to the rules very seriously. I also wanted to clarify the record. McKinsey has exited Russia. We exited a year ago. We have no activities whatsoever in Russia.
Yeah, but Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, sir. 2014. That took a heck of a long time for you to realize what was happening in Crimea and the Donbass. But I'll come back to my question, which was not answered. Could you clearly tell us whether the rules were followed? And like, it's not about whether you take the rules seriously. It's about whether you actually followed them. So the government says you didn't follow all the rules. Did you follow all the rules?
So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to clarify, because my interpretation of the press release was that it said two things. The first was that there was no political involvement in the selection of McKinsey for contracts, and the second, it said the rules were not followed. It was not clear who was or was not following the rules.
That's correct. It says, however, there are indications that certain administrative requirements and procedures were not consistently followed. But you're telling us rules were followed, and the government's saying rules were not followed. I didn't say that, you know, it was wholly on one party or the other, but clearly rules were not followed. Do you accept that rules were not followed in the awarding of these contracts?
If you follow the word of the independent review, the TBS, it would say somewhere the rules were not followed.
Okay, and I hope you believe that, but it's contrary to what you said in your initial testimony.
No,
that
what I
rules
said
were
is
followed.
McKinsey follows the rules.
Well, okay, but you received contracts through a process that did not follow the rules. You either didn't follow the rules or you benefited from the government not following the rules. Let me ask you. You talked about digital transformation. Did you advise the government at any point on the Phoenix Pay system?
No.
Okay. Has McKinsey done opioid work in Canada?
This is an important question, and
yes.
the answer is McKinsey has done no opioid sales and marketing work in Canada.
Have you advised Purdue Pharma in Canada or any other opioid manufacturers?
As I said, McKinsey has done no opioid sales and marketing in Canada.
So you don't do it, obviously, but you're advising companies that do it, correct?
We do not advise on opioid sales and marketing in Canada. And
have you done work for Purdue Canada?
And Mr. Chair, I'm here and I'm happy to take questions about our relationship with the federal government and the work that we've done and the results that we
great. I'm asking you a question. Have you done work for Purdue Pharma Canada?
I do not believe we have done work for Purdue Canada.
Okay. Have you done work for opioid manufacturers here in Canada?
I don't know. I have been the managing partner of McKinsey since September 2022.
Right. Okay. Well, if you could send a follow-up to the committee, please, about which opioid manufacturers you have done work for in Canada. So McKinsey analysts were advising the Prime Minister's Growth Council, correct?
McKinsey was providing data and analytical support to the Growth Council.
Correct. Were people who worked on the Growth Council, were any of the analysts who worked on the Growth Council also working on other projects, paid projects for the Government of Canada?
Again, you know, McKinsey was providing data and analytical support to the Growth Council. I do not know the specifics of what happened to those folks after that.
Okay. It would be very convenient if people that were doing work for the Growth Council were simultaneously doing work for the government on paid projects or seeking paid projects. And we know from the email record that your predecessor, Andrew Pickersgill, supplied analysts for the Growth Council and was also involved in soliciting work for the government. Can you confirm that's the case?
So McKinsey did provide analysts and analytical resources to support the Growth Council's work.
Mr. Pickersgill provided those analysts and also was soliciting work from the government, correct?
So again, McKinsey was providing analysts to support the Growth Council.
And the same person who was providing that analysis was also soliciting work from the government. Does that seem like a conflict of interest to you?
So a couple thoughts. First of all, McKinsey signed a document with the Growth Council stipulating that we had to adhere to the conflict of interest requirements of the federal government, which we did.
Right, but you're not answering my question. My question is, does it seem like a conflict of interest that your predecessor, Andrew Pickersgill, was simultaneously supplying analysts and analysis to the government while also soliciting paid work from the government? Does that seem like a conflict of interest to you?
Conversations between an advisory firm and the government is a routine procedure.
Thank you, Mr. Paul.
That's just not the question.
That is,
okay.
That's right, that is their time.
Thank you, Chair. McKinsey is an ethical dumpster fire, and you, sir, are supposed to answer questions about it. And there are so many things that you are unaware of. You're unaware of the work done in Russia and China. You're unaware of the fact that rules weren't followed in these contracts. You're unaware of the internal audit report that my colleague has brought out, and you're unable to answer questions about whether there was a conflict of interest when Andrew Pickersgill, your predecessor, was supplying analysis to the Prime Minister's Growth Council at the same time as he was pitching the government on contracts, while McKinsey the whole time was not on the lobbying registry. I would like to know, just as we wrap up today, if Andrew Pickersgill will be prepared to testify before the committee, since he was managing partner during most of the period we're covering, and perhaps can shed some light on the things you have been unable or unwilling to answer. Is Mr. Pickersgill available to testify before this committee?
Mr. Chair, I'm here as the managing partner of McKinsey Company in compliance with the request of the committee. I'm here to answer the questions that are being asked to the best of my ability. Okay. And I'm happy to try and continue answering the questions. Right.
But we do need to have answers from McKinsey, and there's clearly a lot of things you've said you can't or you won't or you're not able to answer. So if you can bring the message back that this committee does have the power to subpoena witnesses, we want to hear from Mr. Pickersgill specifically about the work he did for the Growth Council at the same time as he was working on paid government contracts. And we will have Andrew Pickersgill testify before the committee by whatever means are necessary. So I hope that he will make himself available to testify before the committee. I think he has important things to share with us.
Thank you, Mr. Genuis. Mr. Hostfather, if you'll finish this off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Palter, for being here, and thank you for the fact that you shared so much information with the committee. I think it is absolutely important to state that McKinsey actually complied completely with what the committee asked. I also would note that Mr. Pickersgill has not been summoned here by the majority of the members of the committee at this point. He's not been asked to be a witness by anybody other than one person.